Bonnie Higginson. I know some of you, I've known a couple of you for a long, long time. I've been at Murray State for about 35 years, kind of my whole life. And went on, I was with what we used to call the Learning Center, which was developmental studies courses, for about 8 or 9 years, and then I went on tenure track way back in 1988, and then did a number of different things. What I love most is teaching, but I also did administration and served as a department chair, served as the provost for 3 years. So I guess Elizabeth asked me because I have been around for a long time, and I have looked at a number of teaching statements over the course of my years here, and I've written a number of teaching statements. I would not say that I'm an expert, but as I thought about this, I tried to come up with some suggestions and ideas for you all. And I really want you to ask questions as we go along, go through this handout. If something doesn't make sense or if you disagree, I do think there are differences across the university, perhaps in expectations for the teaching statement. And we might talk about those. You may share your experiences if you're willing to. But certainly once I left what was then the College of Education, I left that as department chair, and some years later moved into the provost office. When I was provost for those 3 years, I began to sense that there were some differences in expectations across the colleges with regard to teaching statements. But there are some things that I think would hold true regardless of academic discipline, department, college. So the first thing I did here was to pull the actual wording from the Murray State University Faculty Handbook regarding teaching excellence, and this appears both for promotion and for tenure. The interesting thing about this statement that may be neither here nor there, but might be a good thing for you to know, is that I believe this statement has had very little revision, if any, since the early 90s. And in the early 90s, there was a process that was put into place that lasted for, well, it varied by college, but for 3 to 10 years, okay? And the process was fondly called the blue boxes. Every faculty member had a blue box, and there were dividers in it, and every year you were to prepare your annual review materials or tenure or promotion, as the case may be, by using this blue box. And the language in this statement reflects the categories that faculty had to address. So when you see, there's some key words here, but unmistakable demonstration of teaching and advising effectiveness. That's a really important phrase in our tenure policy, that you really have to demonstrate that. You can't, and I'm going to give you some bad examples, but I won't attach names to them. That would be really, really bad. But unmistakable demonstration of teaching and advising effectiveness. An example of, a poor example of that would be someone who simply writes, and this is a true story, I think I'm a pretty good teacher because people tell me that I am, and students seem to like my classes and give me good evaluations. End of statement. Now, this individual did happen to be quite a good teacher, but the individual did not provide any kind of documentation or evidence of that. So that's an example of a pretty poor teaching statement. So then it goes on. Teaching effectiveness will be judged by examining instructional delivery skills, instructional design skills, content expertise, and course management through the use of student evaluation. And here's where it gets a little awkward, and teaching portfolios. That's really kind of referencing that system we had many years ago. Some areas may still does anyone use the word teaching portfolio these days? Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, probably the holdout would have been people in the College of Education, because we use those terms with our students, teaching portfolios and putting together lots of materials. So then it says, see the report of the Task Force on Teaching Evaluation, September 26, 1991. Well, you can find that, but it's not easy to find. That task force did some really great work, and one big piece of their work was about advising, and how advising is part of good teaching. It should be considered not just what you do in the classroom, but if you have advisees, if you're working with students regarding class scheduling, career choices, changing majors, all of the things that they come to us asking us for help with, then that's part of your whole teaching portfolio as well. So then it goes on, evidence of concern for students, including academic advising and contributions to student development, should be considered. Contributions to student development. Ryan, you mentioned that you work with students, you're co-advisor for the Murray State News. That, to me, is certainly a contribution to student development. You are actually teaching in many ways, even though it may not be the typical structured class. You're teaching them how to become better journalists and better writers. Advising an academic organization would also be considered. There are lots of things we do, working with the residential colleges, advising an honor society, working with the academic team. There are many, many different things that faculty do outside of the classroom that contribute to student development and that can be tied into teaching. Then advising skills will be evaluated by the ability to provide accurate and timely information to students on course selection, academic and degree requirements, policies and options, career opportunities in graduate and professional school. Well, we don't really have a means to evaluate, a structured means to evaluate that. Department chairs have informal ways to evaluate advising, stemming somewhat from maybe the negative, someone going to my department chair and saying, or a group of students or a student saying, she told me to do this and it was wrong. I ended up taking courses that I didn't need. Or so sometimes department chairs have insights into whether a faculty member is successful in advising or working with students outside of the classroom, but we don't really have a structured way of measuring that. So, one very linear way to organize the teaching statement is to write a narrative that addresses those key components: instructional delivery, instructional design, how do you develop your courses, content expertise, what is it that you bring to the classes you teach. Many of you, since I know a few of you, you have experience beyond higher education. You bring those skills. You bring your knowledge from graduate school and your experiences. You may bring in your research. Your research may inform your teaching. Maybe some of your service activities serve to inform your teaching. So a discussion of content expertise, how you manage your courses, academic advising, and other contributions to student development. So I've seen teaching statements that allocate roughly a paragraph or two to each of those areas. And I've heard faculty say, tenured faculty who do reviews, I like that. I like that. I like it when people follow that kind of pattern, because I know they're addressing everything that is stated in the tenure policy. But that doesn't fit everyone. Some of us don't want to approach writing a teaching statement in such a linear way. So we'll talk about other ways, but I do think, as you think about your teaching statement, it's important to address all of those areas in some way, so that someone reviewing would be able to say, oh yes, I see where he talks about or has written about how he designs his courses. I see information that lets me know that she has the expertise needed to teach these courses. So it might not be quite so straightforward, but it should be there.
What I'm curious about on the course management, like, I teach lots of courses. So the way I manage this course is quite different than how I would manage a lecture course versus a lab course versus whatever.
Right.
So do I really need to delineate that, or just make more of a broad statement?
I don't think you do. I think several of you, I'm sure, teach a number of different courses and may teach both undergraduate and graduate. In my opinion, you should not go into extensive detail about every course you teach. You should give a general overview and then provide examples. Again, not necessarily for every course, but provide examples for each of those areas.
When I teach a lab, these are some of the ways I blah, 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 blah.
I organize
and
it.
when I teach undergrads, I do things this way versus when I teach grads.
Right, right. Welcome in.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late.
How are you? Let me send a handout down to you. Ian is in the School of Agriculture,
Yes, thank you.
and you have been here
This year will be 10 years.
10 years. That was going to be my guess. Yeah.
Thank you.
After Elizabeth contacted me and asked me to do this, I thought, well, I'm going to send an email to several people on campus that I know are passionate about teaching and get their feedback. And so one person I contacted is Dwayne Boland. He's a professor in the history department, loves teaching, is very creative. He writes a column for the Murray Ledger and Times, and probably half of his columns are concerned with teaching in some way. He really worries over every aspect of it. And so he wrote, and I think this is so important, he wrote, I think the missing ingredient in many teaching statements that I've read is passion. Faculty members must show how much they care about teaching beyond the workshops, the positive teaching evaluations, etc. Really showing that you care. And he sent me, and if we have time, I can read to you a couple of his statements or portions of his statements that really reflect his passion for teaching. So I have read a number of teaching statements, I agree with Dwayne, where maybe it's all there, but you just don't sense that the person is tied to it. There's some distance there. So being able to show how much you really care, and one of the ways to do that we'll go into a little bit more here in a few minutes, is to show how you try to change things based on the feedback you receive. To me, maybe it's a little bit of a stretch to say that's passion, but for a faculty member to take into account things that the students say, their own reflections, to truly reflect on their teaching and to say, I realize that this part of my class or this topic or whatever it is, that it wasn't working, that it could be better, and so these are the steps I took to improve. To me, that shows caring and passion for teaching, really trying to prove and willingness to change things. Then I contacted Ted Brown, who was the Dean of the College of Humanities and Fine Arts for at least 10 years. And that is the largest college on campus, so he saw many, many teaching statements. And he gave us three key elements: an articulate and truly personal statement, epitomizing the person's teaching philosophy and goals; some discussion of how the person's teaching methods illustrate or exemplify that philosophy and those goals. And then evidence of interest in and concern for students, including a discussion of teaching improvements made through experience, discussion of any efforts to help students outside of class through advising, and so on. So I thought his were very good in that he hits on, he's the first in our discussion today to mention philosophy. Some faculty really do adhere to a particular philosophy and they want to write about that. They've studied a theory or philosophy or pedagogy and they want to write about their belief. That is perfectly fine. We see that very often in the College of Education. Constructivist philosophy and so on, and then they'll show. But not everyone needs to do that. You don't need to feel that you don't need to feel that you need to include names or book titles or whatever. You should be developing your own philosophy based on your experience and your beliefs about teaching and learning. So it doesn't have to be an established philosophy, in my view. I also contacted Terry Durding, who is a professor in the biology department, a really fine teacher who I know has served on many tenure and promotion committees within her college. And she said, knowledge about modern pedagogy and its relationship to improve student learning and the mission of MSU. This center, the workshops and the services of this center can really help faculty who want to learn about new things and who want to begin to embed new ideas in their teaching. And so what Terry is saying is she wants to see people who are trying new things and who are aware of new trends and don't just walk into the classroom and lecture for 50 minutes or run PowerPoint slides and read from those for 75 minutes. She also mentioned areas of professional growth in thinking about and implementing teaching, responsiveness to student and peer input, and importantly, learning from experts and recent literature. Any professional development activities in which the person was engaged and how the person uses evidence from formative and summative assessments of students to inform their teaching practice. I think that is so very important. And then she has specific examples of change and growth in various courses. Going back to Jennifer, who told me she teaches graduate, all graduate?
This semester, yeah.
This semester, okay. Some online, some ITV, some face-to-face. And while you don't need to write pages and pages about it, but I think what Terry's suggesting, and I agree with, is with an ITV class, for those who teach ITV, discussing some change you made based on your previous experience with an introductory class, describing some change you made with online classes. So showing that you're flexible and that you're attentive to the need to change.
What's ITV?
What is ITV?
We broadcast to Paducah, Madisonville, Fort Campbell, so I'm in a room with some students
Okay.
on a camera, and they're on our other satellite campuses.
Spectator conference. So.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. It's interactive television and chemistry. I don't know of any courses that are offered via ITV in chemistry. It's offered through some graduate programs, social work, and education. Do you all do any ITV,
I
Jamie?
think we have an advertising class in the summer and maybe
I
this
think Bob Valentine's done 168 that way,
Yeah.
the intro course.
And Gil has done the intro to advertising course that
Yes.
way.
So it creates special challenges because you,
Yeah.
very special challenges. Actually, well, I shouldn't say this. It's very unprofessional of me to say that. I've been afraid of ITV from the time it came out in the late 80s. It's much better now than it was when it first came out, but I thought, wow, if I can get through my career without teaching ITV, I'll be happy. But people do it very well. It's
hard when you've got one person.
It is, it's hard to engage that
Can't
person.
do- Well, I don't have a
Group
problem
activities.
engaging them, but I can't do any class projects or anything, you know, where they can work
Yeah,
together.
you can't say,
because
oh, get a partner and talk,
Right.
because it's one person at that one side. So, yeah, it creates very
We do have a
special
CPR
challenges.
dummy in Fort Campbell that we use as a backup student.
There you go. Not likely to
We
disrupt
named
class,
him and
right?
everything. Wow.
That's funny. One thing I really thought about is there tends to be an over-reliance on, or many people feel that there's an over-reliance on IAS scores, the student feedback scores, in evaluating teaching. And that is really true in some instances. I've seen it, and I think it's really important to consider other ways that you can speak about or write about your teaching beyond the IAS 3.52 and 4.1 and 2.6. There are people who would say that information is really meaningless. I don't really agree with that, but I think there's a place for it, and that information can be useful. But for us to think that that is the end-all be-all in evaluating teaching is really wrong. So what are some other ways that you can write about your teaching and provide information that would be considered valid? One is to request formal or informal input from students during the semester. This is something I've done quite a bit, more in recent years. I didn't think of it when I first started teaching, but in recent years, I don't give a form that they bubble in, although that is something that one could do. But I do post some questions around the middle of the semester, and I hand out index cards about that size and ask them to write about what's working, what's not working, what suggestions do they have. That is so helpful to me to improve my own teaching and to address the needs of the students, but it's certainly a means of feedback. It also sends kind of a message to students that I care about what they think, and particularly if they see that I've taken into account their suggestions and ideas and requests, then they go, wow, she really cares, and she wants to meet our needs and has been willing to change things because of what we said. So that is one thing you can do. We don't have a very structured system on this campus. Some campuses have very good systems of evaluating teaching, either by having a colleague come and observe or by having the chair come and observe. Do you all, does your chair come and observe you teach? No. Happens, I know it happens in our college.
I think you guys might be the only one though.
Really? That can be very, very helpful.
Mine's on video.
Yours on, yes, so you have the evidence already recorded. Asking a colleague to come and observe is, especially a colleague that you value, that you see as a strong teacher, someone who understands your discipline and who could come in and observe and provide you with some feedback, would be a very good thing to do. I wish we had a more structured system on campus for doing that. I think it would help people all the way around. Using suggestions from the student comment sheets, those yellow sheets that you get back. Most, if not all, departments say that you should not include those yellow comment sheets in your files. They're for you. They're supposed to be for your eyes only. And so putting all of those in to document teaching is not really a good idea. Even back in the old days, we were able to summarize those. I typed every one of them up and included them. But it was deemed later on that that's not really valid information, because someone could just pick the good comments and leave off the bad ones and that sort of thing. But writing about how students on those comment sheets made suggestions for changes and showing how you took those into account and made those changes would be perfectly appropriate. So for instance, students, I taught EDU 103, Intro to Education, last fall. And one of my really weak areas is understanding some pretty complicated technology that students are required to use. Some is in Frankfurt, they're required to go in and fill out all this stuff as in their very first education class. And there's a second system that they have to use. So I haven't been able to answer their questions very well, or I wasn't in the fall. So, and I think it was only one student who wrote this, but that student wrote, how can this be improved? More knowledge about KFETs and whatever that other one is, live text. And I thought, he or she is exactly right. I need to take the time to learn about it, to be able to answer the questions and not say, well, you can go ask so-and-so, or you can look at this. I need to take ownership and responsibility for that. So if I were writing a teaching statement, I would probably talk about that one kind of thing as a way to improve my teaching and meet the needs of the students. Comments, yeah. Let me stop talking for a minute and hear from you. Questions, comments?
Well, why can't the yellow sheets, particularly for young faculty that I don't have a lot of publications, I don't have anything else to add to, but the yellow sheets, I don't necessarily think you have to put them all in there, but why can't they be part of the rest of your teaching evaluation?
Great question. I think people, this was some time ago, and it might be an issue to raise at the department level, but I think people felt that it wasn't unbiased, that it's data that could be manipulated. But listening to Cindy's question, part of me says, what is wrong if you're getting comments from students that say, she was always organized, she was energetic, she really knows her subject area, I learned so much in this class. Why can't you use that?
I wonder, I think about getting a colleague to come and sit and look at a class and evaluate. Would it be appropriate to say, here, colleague, here's all of my yellow sheets, all of them. Would you mind perusing them, and then as part of a statement in evaluating my teaching, you looked at my class, could you make this part of your evaluation? Just peruse these, say what you want to about them.
Right.
And summarize?
I think that would be fine. It depends. I'm getting myself in a corner here because so much depends on the faculty and their and administrators and their views about the yellow sheets. I mean, it's really a conversation that probably needs to take place in every department. How can we use these? And that would be where there would be less chance of manipulation there. Here are all of mine. Or asking before you even see them. They do, this is really stretching it a little bit, but they do come in to the college and they get separated out or something. To ask them to go directly to that colleague where you haven't even seen them. There's no chance that you have pulled out the ones that may say negative things. I know, isn't that, I know. I know. But people did. People did back in the day, and so.
But I also know the students know the yellow sheets aren't for anybody but our eyes. And so I've had semesters where students are playing jokes on me and they write silly things, like a joke. There may have been a joke in the class that they repeat.
Inside
And-
humor, yeah.
And if that was read somewhere else, they would go, what kind of class is she?
Yeah.
What kind of class is going on in here? So my students know that those are just for our eyes, and
Yeah.
I didn't tell mine when I was.
And it is
Well, they knew.
probably
They know.
fine
They know.
to have a statement or two in your teaching statement about the yellow comment sheets, in general, what the positives are, and especially if there are suggestions, how you've used those suggestions. I think that, I don't understand why anyone would really disagree with that.
So you're talking using a couple of quotes from them in there?
Maybe a couple of quotes, or saying, you know, when students comment, in terms of favorable comments, students consistently indicate blah, blah, blah. You would have that evidence to back it up if somebody said, let me see your yellow sheets. So yes, a few quotes, but I know they don't want you to put the yellow sheets in there. Pitfalls, things that happen that really can cause problems. Inaccurate reporting of the IAS data. So a faculty member writes, the range in items 1 through 4 on the IAS for all the courses I taught last year from 3.0 to 4.1. And the reviewer, that is something that's included in the file. Those sheets are included. So the reviewer, be it another faculty member or department chair or the dean, is flipping through and sees 2.5 and sees that the faculty member, maybe just by mistake, did not report the range correctly. That's a problem. So when you start working with those numbers, whether you collapse information, a lot of times over the course, some of you are just in your first year, over the course of the 5-year period before going up for tenure, a person will take this course, IET 421, and you've taught it every semester for 10 semesters, and put down the average scores. And then EDU 103, you taught it in every spring semester, and so they'll consolidate that. You do need to wind up, as you go up for tenure or promotion, having a summary data, not just all those sheets for people to wade through. But you need to be sure it's accurate.
So in a statement, do we have to include those numbers? Like you said, an average on this course over the 5 years, averages from item 1 to 4 is 4, but don't you think it's redundant already? They
To
have
put it in the statement, I do. I don't think you need to rehash all of those numbers in the statement. You may want to mention a few, so for instance, but in a constructive way. So for instance, if I look at my evaluations and I see that in the area, and I'm really meant to bring one of those for us to look at, I'm sorry I didn't do that, but in the area of organization, course organization, that's on virtually every form. Let's say I see that that is one of my lowest, that I see that for every course in the fall semester, that that's one of my lowest, that everything else is okay, but that one falls low. So I start trying to figure out how to be better organized and how to improve the course organization, and I take some steps to do that. That's what I would discuss in the teaching statement. That's when the numbers might be relevant. So, and sometimes people will discuss that over the course of several years, that because it doesn't happen overnight. If you're trying to improve something in your teaching, it can take a while. You may have to do some trial and error. You may try something and it doesn't help the next semester, but then you latch on to something that really does work. And you can talk about that and say, you know, they've consistently risen since I really started working on this, and these are the things I did to improve.
Should we focus that data more on the courses that we pretty much are basically every semester are our staple courses? Or, because every now and then we'll get taught, we're teaching a course that we may not teach
Right.
another 2 or 3 years. So should we just have our core courses that we pretty much teach every semester, focus that data instead?
Probably so in the
Okay.
statement, because that's where you can see the change over time.
Really, could you get away with just basically talking about the composite score? I mean, if your scores are pretty uniformly high across
Yes,
the board.
yeah.
Okay. You don't have to go line item.
No, I would not go line item, but there were things in the, out of the, 20-something items, there were always things that I would look at and go, okay, why is that lower than the others? And what can I do?
So if
Do
you
I
see
need to
a
be
line-
concerned about
okay.
that?
So if it's something that would make someone go, you might want to explain.
Address it.
Right.
Okay.
Or if it's just something that you want to improve, maybe your scores are typically really strong, but you decided that you wanted to work
Okay.
on something, and you saw benefits from the extra effort.
We've had like one semester that just one class, you had a very small class, and 2 or 3 students just torpedoed you because it was a toxic environment, the kids hated you, whatever. I'm not saying it's happened, I'm just asking because we do have very, very small classes.
Yes.
And one student going down to the negative can pull an otherwise really high score down to like a 2.5.
Right. And I think people look at that, if you see a class of 5 and you see, because you can see the percentages and you see that one student really influenced that. I think reviewers at every level take that into account.
But is it okay to put what she said in the report, like because of the small student count, my evaluation is went down? I mean, is it okay to put in the statement or?
That's a great question, and it's kind of the next item there. You need to be really careful about it. So a few years ago, I reviewed a teaching statement written by a faculty member who really did struggle with teaching. But that faculty member wrote about the fact that the students weren't motivated, that they were poorly prepared, and the more she said, sorry, I didn't mean to get the gender there, but anyway, the more information there, the more it led reviewers to believe that this faculty member was blaming
Yeah.
the students for poor performance. So you do have to be, I think sometimes it is appropriate to mention this was a very small class, but you don't want to say so much that it appears that you're not holding yourself accountable. And that's what was happening in the case I just described. The person was not being accountable. Instead, it was pushing the blame out.
So in your, the first one you said the linear fashion of writing. So in which category these numbers fall into?
Good point. Those first categories, all of those, probably course management, would you say, Elizabeth? Or instructional delivery. It kind of depends on the item, right? So back to my example about course organization, if I would write about course, that under course management. But if it was delivery, if let's say they really zinged me on enthusiasm, then I would talk about that in the course delivery, that, wow, I need to be a little more excited about what I'm teaching. Another pitfall is poor organization. That's why sometimes that linear approach is, you can't criticize someone for taking that approach really, because it's so straightforward. But if someone just rambles or goes on and on, or you know what poor organization is. So that can hurt you. Grammatical errors can certainly hurt. in writing this kind of document. And then something that people often forget, and it's not quite as important in the early stages of the tenure process or promotion process in the first year or two. Something people often forget is that ultimately they're writing for an audience of people who will not be familiar with the discipline, will not necessarily understand jargon within that discipline, or just using course numbers, IET 683. You probably want to write out the name of the course. So you have to keep in mind that when you apply for tenure, when you apply for promotion, that's going to go beyond your department, up through the dean's level, and to the university level, and it's important to communicate in a way that people can understand.
When crafting the narrative, there's a lot of room on the spectrum between being very formal and dry and being overly informal. How much personality, what types of tone should we try and insert into this?
Great question. Wonderful question. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I know from my personal preference that, kind of going back to what Dwayne Boland said, in reading these, if I see passion, if I see even a little bit of humor, it makes me really happy to see that the person, you don't want to be flip or sarcastic or any of that, but I think it's okay to be a little bit informal. It's a formal document, but it's not a dissertation.
So a little bit of let a little bit of personality.
And use I, write it in first person. Okay, so a few other things, and these might be a little bit repetitive, but make sure that all your statements are accurate. One thing I've seen, not so much in the teaching statement, but I've seen people take credit for things that I knew they didn't do. I knew that another faculty member had actually done that work. That happened more in the service area, or even taking credit for presentations or something. So none of you would do that, but it's pretty scary when you see something that egregious in a document like that. So ensure that all your statements are accurate, that and that they can be supported with evidence. It may be that you're not supplying the evidence, back to the yellow comment sheets, that you're not putting them in there, but if asked, you would be able to say, yes, here it is. I think it's a good idea as part of the introduction or towards the beginning to provide an overview of your course load for the year. During the past academic year, I taught 8 courses, 3 graduate level, whatever.
I was just thinking 8. Wow.
Is that too many or too few?
Oh, I was thinking per semester, never mind.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Nobody wants to do that.
You weren't going to that college, were you?
I think I've stated number 3 pretty clearly, that you utilize feedback to improve instruction and show results if possible. Don't overstate or exaggerate. Asking colleagues, one of the best things I did many, many years ago, and I don't know why I thought of it at the time, but I was so glad that I did it. When I was getting ready to prepare my tenure file, I asked a colleague, I was in the College of Education, I asked a colleague in the College of Business who had gone up for tenure the year before, if I could take a look at his application for tenure and promotion. And that was really helpful to me, just to see how it was done in a different college, how he organized his. So asking someone within your department who's been recently tenured or promoted, but also maybe asking someone who's in a completely different discipline can can give you some insights into the process and give you some ideas. Online courses. I know Jennifer teaches online courses. Anyone, I know, Marcia, okay. One of the real problems we have, I don't think we've discovered a solution yet, is that there is a very low return rate for student evaluations for online classes. And this can really hurt because that's a piece of evidence that many people consider to be important. So you have 20 students in your online class and you only get 3 evaluations returned. Well, let me ask before we get started, have you figured out a solution for that?
Put some percentage in the grade. Put some percentage. Put some percentage in the.
On the grade?
Yeah.
I'd give an extra credit for doing
Yeah,
it.
say this is
Community
certain.
college, last semester, they don't release their grade till they do it.
I think a lot of universities are like that. I'm not sure why we haven't moved to that. In the meantime, I would recommend that you be very direct with, and maybe you already are, and maybe it's not helping, but be very direct with the students in online courses and say, your feedback is very important to me. I really need for you to take the probably 5 minutes it takes to complete the evaluation. This is important to me. It's important that my superiors see this information. Please take time to do it.
How do reviewers, just as you said that reviewers will look at a low student enrollment and look how that will skew the results, what about online courses? Because their expectation sometimes is a little different.
Right. And I think most reviewers, in most conversations I've had with people reviewing documents, they understand that there are some different challenges there. I think it may be even more important with online classes to try to seek additional feedback, informal measures, asking them for feedback 1 or 2 times, maybe even 3 times during the semester, asking them to submit things to you about what's going well, what concerns they have, that can show that you, even if the return rate on the course evaluations isn't what you want it to be, that you've made every effort to reach out to your students and get input from them as to how the class could be better or how well it's going, the praise that you might get.
Thank you.
And I put at the very end, limit your teaching, here we've talked about all of this, limit it to 2 pages. I say that that's not a hard and fast rule, but I say that because if you can really focus your writing and hone in on the most important aspects of your teaching and what you do that shows that you are an excellent teacher, as opposed to just kind of going on and on with example after example, it will serve you better. And just to keep in mind that in some departments, in some of the larger departments, committees are reviewing, the departmental committee is reviewing several every year, the department chair, the dean then has more to review and so on. So those well-written, concise statements are viewed very positively, I think, as opposed to something that goes on for 5 pages and going, all right already, you're a good teacher, I get it. But if you can really focus in on the key examples that demonstrate your excellence in teaching, you will be happy to have done it that way, I think.
Is it okay in the narrative to refer to an exhibit that may exist somewhere else in the packet?
It is.
So
It is.
if you have like a continuing ed transcript that you can refer to and then say it's exhibit 1, or that the summative evaluation that your peer did of your yellow pages or whatever.
Right. You might have an appendix for teaching, you might have one, you would probably have one for research, and you would have
Yeah.
one for service. So yes, for the teaching, if you attended, participated in a professional development workshop, if you, any documents that serve to support your desire to be the best teacher you can be would be appropriate there.
I'm assuming you mean double-spaced, 2 pages double-spaced? Because I could make it if it's single-spaced. I could-
People do that different ways.
Ah.
Don't use, 9 or 10 font. But if it's single-spaced, at least double-spaced between paragraphs. That's just my little thing. That's probably not what everyone would say, but so that it's not so compressed. What else? Have I touched on the things that you, I haven't told you exactly how to do this, I know, but I hope we've hit on some considerations in doing it. I've read yours before because Ian's been here for 10 years. Do you have any comments about your experience in, as I recall, you did a really good job.
Thank you. Well, last time when I did that, I think I prepared almost every year, and then I asked my mentor and also my chairman, my dean, and whoever the professor, the superior in my department to read my teaching philosophy. I just give to everyone and then just give me feedback. So, and then also I asked my colleagues from different departments to see my writing and go from there. Yeah. I think I did that after 3 years of staying here.
Right.
Yeah.
That concern and interest really sends a powerful message, I think. And gives you
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. And I had that 2.5
editing.
things, 2.5 teaching evaluation. It's the first time I got it. So my chairman told me that the most important is the improvement.
Yes.
So, and that in my teaching philosophy, I changed, like I said that how I changed from 2.5 to whatever the value, the end value, and then what kind of thing I did, and then have the proof also. So that's what I did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there an approach that you recall from one that you've read that still sticks in your mind for a good reason?
Good question. That's a good question.
He's a journalist.
Yeah. He knows how to ask questions. What's coming to my mind, which is a little mushy, not one in particular, but when it's written in a way that I can just, it's almost as if the person is talking to me, and I can just feel the passion and the interest that the person has. And I can really see that, or believe that the person has spent a great deal of time thinking about teaching and how to be the best teacher possible. So it's hard to come up with one example, but I've read many like that over the course of the years I've been on committees and doing reviews. And like I said earlier, I think if there's a way to inject a little bit of humor into it, that's a great thing.
Can I add one
That
more?
helps.
Yes,
One
please.
thing that I did is I create a new course, which is independent study for undergraduate student, and then I allow students to be in my class like every semester from 3 to 5 students, which is like research in agriculture. And usually because they are working one by one, it's like mentoring process, so they give us better evaluation because work like really one by one, and then
Right.
we pull up the teaching operation in general. So is that legal like that? But yeah, so I create new course. It is very, it's the suggestion from one of my mentors.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that time, like, well, we need a lot of students that like to do the undergraduate research, so how about you create new course? And I create, and then if I have 5 in one semester or 3, they will evaluate me, right? And then usually because we work very close.
You spend so much time together, yeah, yeah.
So even though some of the requirement, the critics like, too much hours, something like that, but it's something good. And especially if they present a paper, they will just love the mentors, and no matter what we said, they just love us, so they will give us like 5. So nice.
Well, yes. And I think that's, you've said something really important there in that in instances where you are working with students kind of one-on-one or in very small groups, getting their feedback is really important. I would say that some people can be successful teaching 100 students in a lecture, but they can't work one-on-one. So being able to show that you can be successful in teaching a regular type class, kind of an ITB class, if that's part of what you teach, serving as a mentor, that's part of teaching. It's all important. And so including that, I'm sure, and I can't think of anyone on this campus, of course, but I'm sure that there are faculty somewhere out there who really aren't very successful working in a mentoring kind of situation. So it's important to show that you are capable of doing that. So I think the idea, when Elizabeth contacted me, I think the idea behind this was for all of you to try to find a little time over the course of the next week to draft out a teaching statement where then we can come back together and do some peer evaluation.
Great.
Yes.
Homework.
Homework, yeah.
Great.
Hey, it is free feedback before your
I like it.
tenure packets
Exactly, I
are
like
due.
it. I was about to ask if we could do that.
Yes.
What would you think a better approach to address issues such as diversity, students with learning disabilities in your
In your teaching or in writing your statement?
in writing your statement?
I think if you have, and Cindy can really speak to this because that's the kind of work she did for so many years on this campus. If you work with those students outside of class, if you work with the professionals on campus, whether it's in the counseling center or the SLD?
No, it's
SSD.
student disability, so it's SDS.
SDS.
Yes.
That is a part of other contributions to student development, I think,
Yeah.
in your teaching, that you're spending additional time to help students be successful. And to write about that is very appropriate.
I saw the admonition about don't pass the buck and blame others or explain away. Early in my career here, when I was teaching some technology courses, I had graduate assistants teach labs. And sometimes from semester, what do you get from one year to the next? The evaluation is supposed to be for you, but really,
If they
your
get mad at that grad
your
assistant.
grad assistant, and you can look through and pretty much tell who had what grad assistant. It's an evaluation of them. So is that something that should be looked at, mentioned, explained?
I do think it should be mentioned because otherwise reviewers would not be aware of the fact that there was someone else involved in instruction. So,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
I mean, you wouldn't even have to blame them. You could just say, I taught this course with a number of different graduate students. And, right? I mean, would that
Right.
be enough to,
Yeah.
Right.
or say maybe in the future, and years later,
Yeah.
whatever you did to fix that?
And maybe I was too too harsh about the blaming thing. I think what you don't want to do is, there are probably points where you might say, this particular graduate student in this semester had great difficulty, and that wouldn't be considered blaming. Where it becomes a problem is if someone was writing, as the person I was thinking about earlier did, for every course, it was the students, it was the time the course was offered, it was where the course was offered, or it was never that person being held accountable. So there are times when a little bit of blaming is probably appropriate, so.
Do the reviewers give more weightage to the teaching statement, or do they give more weightage to your evaluations when they're?
It depends on the reviewer.
What would you do?
If I saw a teaching statement that was really congruent with all the other pieces of evidence, then I value the teaching statement more.
Because at the end
A
of the day,
poor
we-
teaching statement leads reviewers to go to those numbers, I think.
but someone can exaggerate the statement, right?
Right. But if the statement is accurate and supported, if it's really well done, then I tend to place more value on that statement, because I know the person has spent the time tying those pieces of evidence together, linking everything together and making it very clear. But if the teaching statement isn't very clear, I've always had to go to those other pieces of evidence. Others might disagree with me, but then those start to carry more weight. And sometimes you don't want those to carry more weight.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the positioning. This is pretty much the very first document in the TMP packet, correct?
It
Or-
is,
okay, I just wanna-
it is. I think the Vita, I'm trying to remember, Ian,
Yeah. Yes.
the Vita
you
comes
mean-
first.
Oh.
You
This
knew
one,
a long time
teaching
ago.
statement in my. I think
And I've looked at them more recently, but I haven't thought
I
about the
think
order.
the teaching first, as I remember, because in last time, the CV is in the back.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So
And that may vary just a little bit, but teaching always is before research and service and needs of the university, which is something you write about at the tenure year. But yeah, teaching is always the first one.
How is this, because all I did is the IAF for the first time. So how is the teaching statement different than your teaching philosophy that's in the IAF? It's not, this is the
It's
same
not
thing?
necessarily, right.
Okay.
But if there's an annual review process, and I hate to tell you this, Cindy, but some colleges really aren't doing annual review process for everyone. They are for tenure track faculty, but not for tenured faculty, because there's no money. So, where was I going with that? But that it becomes the same thing, but for the tenure document, you're discussing 5 years worth. So an
Oh.
annual review, generally, you're just writing about this
That
past
year.
year.
Oh,
But
okay.
tenure track or for promotion, it's a more comprehensive document where you're discussing teaching over time, research over time, service over time. Wonderful questions. I can't wait to see what you have next week. There will be no red pens involved.
Same time, same place?
We'll all be constructive.
Exactly,
Pardon?
right here.
I hate that we're here with
Bring
all
it.
the
What do you think, Elizabeth? Should they
Oh,
bring
my.
maybe a couple of copies?
Yeah, I'd say 2 or 3 copies.
Yeah, 2 or 3 copies.